Hello, Kevin Herjugs Racing here. I have an all-stock Banshee motor on the bench today. I don't think this one has ever been touched or taken apart. It's on its original bore, 64 millimeters. Everything on it is complete OEM. I've taken it down partially to check everything and see what it was. So now I'm going to disassemble it, showing you everything step by step on what I'm going to do, which is make a nice little pump gas motor, keeping all stock components like the intakes and the carburetors, the cylinders, the head. We'll change out things like if the clutch needs to be upgraded. We're definitely going to do a pancake bearing so the ball doesn't weld to the rod, because we are going to do a dune port and a milled head for pump gas. We'll probably cut the shift star. We might even add a timing plate to it. I think this is a non-California. I've got to be careful with the octane. For the porting specs that I use, you can't run a lot of compression and timing because the octane won't support it. I'm extracting all the power I can out of pump gas, so it doesn't benefit you to run timing and more compression. I set it up on the edge as it is, and the gas I've seen it even degrade over the last couple of years, so I've had to back those off as everybody keeps popping holes in the pistons. And no, it's not the CDI or the Stator or any of that. I kind of know what I'm doing. I've been doing it for 25 years professionally. I use professionally loosely, being paid to do it. And 10 years before that, I was doing it. I've been riding these Banshees. The year they came off the showroom floor, my uncle had bought one, and I was hooked. The very next year, I bought myself one. And the year after that, we started modding them. So I've been doing it for a long time. Now let's jump into this one. Let's start with just the simple stuff. The spark plugs. Just standard NGK. I don't do any of the fancy plugs. I don't like them. They create too much heat. All those new fancier plugs are about more spark and more heat, and we can't do that in these. They just start melting down. So standard NGK BR8 ES. You can run a BR9 ES also, and it's what I like to see in the motors after they've been built a little bit. It keeps the combustion chamber a little cooler, and believe me, we are fighting that every time we're making more horsepower. Try to keep that combustion chamber cooler. So let's start with the carburetors. OEM carburetors, OEM choke. Remember the little choke tube that goes between the carburetors. If you don't have that, this thing won't idle. I've already removed it. Again, I've torn this down already. The Taurus caps are gone. We're going to put a Taurus delete so it gets new caps, throttle cable, and an idle screw. So you loosen these little Phillips head screws. You pop the carburetors out, and we set them to the side. Intakes, stock rubber boot intakes, stock crossover. Nothing wrong with these. These will not choke up any horsepower. You can run them. They do fine. You can even run the stock reed cages. They do fine, especially on a pump gas motor. Everything will do fine. You limit the power on the pump gas. Just because it's pump gas, we can't make a lot of compression, can't do a lot of timing. These even have the stock bat ears on them. And you'll know these if you go to aftermarket reed cages. You'll have to cut these off if you're going to keep the OEM intakes. OEM reed cages with the backing plates still on. That's all OEM. Little black paint and stuff on there. It won't hurt anything. It's just a common wear. These are good reeds, good cages. All the Allen screws on the factory Allen screws on this motor are on the intake. They're size 5 up here on the head. size 5. So we are just, again, these were already loose. I'm just taking them off. The OEM head has 10 12 millimeter nuts. So with 10 of these 12 millimeter nuts. Then the head will come right up, lay it to the side, and then you'll have 8 more of these 12 millimeter nuts holding the cylinders down on each corner of the cylinder, because there's 2 of them, remember. One here and one here. And they just slide right up. Take the 12 millimeter screws off, take the 12 millimeter nuts off, and they come right up. OEM gaskets, you can slide those right up and discard those. And these beefy OEM pistons, you'll see how beefy they are. These rings are gigantic compared to the aftermarket rings, just really thick. These are like 2 stacked together. They give a good long life on them, but everybody overruns them anyway and wears them into the ground. Stock crank. All the stock side covers have Phillips screws. You normally won't be able to get those out so easy. I use an impact driver, smack it with a sledgehammer. This is how you keep them from stripping all out. And you've seen on my other videos me use my Thor hammer and smack this. Don't get the Thor hammer confused with the rubber mallets. The rubber mallets I use a lot to beat the cylinders off when they're stuck and beat the cases apart. You'll see that on videos also. I never hurt anything. A rubber mallet is not going to hurt anything on this motor. On this side, you got a kicker. It's got a 12 millimeter nut. Slides right off once you have the nut out. Again, Phillips screws, and these will usually all need that impact driver with your steel mallet to smack each one to break it loose. You break each one loose, and you can come back and take them all out. This sometimes can be a booger to get off, and a lot of times I'll use the rubber mallet on it also. So rubber mallet makes everything easier. And there's the OEM inside of the clutch area. This is all real easy to take apart. That you take off with your hand. Here's the clutch. Comes out pretty easy. All these screws. 10 millimeters. This has OEM springs in it. We'll upgrade those springs. We'll need stiffer springs even if the clutch is good to hold that 65 to 70 horsepower. This is the keyed pusher for the throwout plate. This is where we put our pancake bearing in, and it'll float freely. This will spin. We allow this to spin so that this ball and rod don't weld themselves together. Yes, when this perch disengages the clutch, pushes this rod into this ball, which hits the back of this pusher, and this is spinning, let's say 10,000 RPM. And this hits it. All this stuff is not spinning at all. And it hits this with such ferocity that it will spin this ball into this rod, and they'll weld together and swell up and be stuck in there. And the only way to get it out is disassemble the whole motor, pull that forward transmission shaft, and it's hollow all the way through, and you have to take a punch and punch it from the other side. I don't know if I have a video showing one that bad where I have to punch out. You'll have to go through all the archivage footage and see. This is retained by one big 32 millimeter nut that has a lock washer on it. Sometimes this lock washer tab will be missing. People will use red Loctite, which will hold it fine, as will this on this side. This has a locking washer too. Same size, 32 millimeter nut. And this locking tab is bent over. All these tabs bend over to hold the nut in place so it doesn't back off. I've seen Loctite on this too, which works. I've used it in the past. Sometimes you're out in the desert, stuff breaks. Red Loctite does wonders. Okay, so we'll spin this off. And this is the inner and outer basket. We'll take this locking washer off. It is keyed to the boss, and the tab bends over to lock this in place so it doesn't spin off. Now, the OEM clutches, you can tell, you won't see these much anymore unless you buy an all-stock Banshee, nobody's touched it, have these rubber bands in them. You take all these and you throw them in the trash. When you start making power, it just chews these all up into little gumball wads. They are there to present a soft engagement and disengagement. When we port and we start making power, there's no softness in the motor. You get all that soft out of the motor and make it hard. You can see the plates are a little rainbowy, so that just shows the slippage of it. There's a size that they give you in the handbook that tells you how thick these should be to be working well. I'm guessing we're going to replace all this with the heavy-duty clutch and not even mess around. And there's the last of the rubber bands. And you can see inner boss washer, outer basket, collar that the basket rides on, and one more washer. And that's everything for the clutch. This little tab, which is missing from a lot of builds, I'll get to this point and this will be gone. Again, you'll need your impact driver to get those out, but this motor, again, I already smacked them and got them loose, and so they would come out quickly. Yep. Nut, conical washer, which only goes on one way, shaped like this, and then flattens out and kind of creates locking tension, although I use red Loctite on this. Blue Loctite would probably be sufficient. And the keyed main gear. So the shift shaft just slides out once the shifter is off the other side. It goes all the way through the case. And we'll take a look at that. It looks like it's in pretty good shape. It doesn't have a ton of hours on this motor. It was still running. This is the shift star. It's in neutral, where one of those mountains is cut in half, and that is why the Banshee is so hard to find neutral. You got to balance it on top of one of these tips that's just been hollowed out a bit. We're going to come through and we're going to cut all these tips down. It allows easier shift in the next gear when you start making a little bit of power. There are other little tricks also. There are spring and roller kits here. I suggest you just do one of them. You cut the shift star, you put the light spring on it, you put the roller on it, and it just becomes too light and it swings the other way. And again, you'll have shifting problems. So either do the star or do the light spring. Don't do them both. If you're making a lot of power, sometimes just the star cut or the spring detent and roller won't be enough. And that's, people think, oh, I did one and it's still not shifting. I'm going to do the other and it's still not shifting. If you do one and you still can't shift, it's time to cut the transmission pro mod, which is specific cuts on specific components in the transmission that allow it to shift up easily when you start making more power and more load. So there's progressive levels of what you have to do. And you see it on the internet all the time. Everybody's trying to spend your money. Yeah, you need a lockout, and you need a 421 at least, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. Those guys are just spending your money. You don't need all that stuff. What you need to know is how much horsepower you want to make. Once I know how much horsepower you want to make, I know which components need to be upgraded versus which are just worn and need to be changed. On the top of this case, again, I've loosened everything up. And since we're going to split this guy, I'm going to take all these little 10mm bolts on the top of the case out. So I'll just loosen those up right now. Get all these out of here. I'll get the pistons off and do the flywheel next. I'm just gonna hit this underside really quick. 2, 4, 6, 8 12mm nuts. These are the same size nuts that are on the head and hold the cylinders down. I only have 4 on there for demonstration purposes, but that's it. That's everything here, here, and on the top that hold the cases together. Now, you can't pull the cases without pulling the pistons off. So they have a circlip in there that you can easily pop out if you haven't seized your motor up. And that just flew out. I usually cover it with my thumb and it just went flying. So be careful of that, because if you don't have new pistons going in, you will lose those very easily. There's that one I got. And you can normally push them right out. Sometimes they will be stuck because of a lot of wear, or you've seized the motor up. And if you've done that, these things don't come out easily. Let's see if one will slide out. I didn't pre-do the pistons. Yep, and they're in there pretty good. So I'm going to have to... Okay, there's one. And there's the wrist pin bearing. And then we'll go over here and do this one. Same thing. Line it up. Do it this way here. Get it on there. Be a little cumbersome. Different C-clamps will work better maybe for the way you like to do it, but this gets the job done. Tighten it up. Got the little smack part, and that will smack it and get it loose without smacking it and potentially bending a rod. Well, you'd have to smack it pretty hard, but you want to be safe. Alright, there's the other one. Wrist pin bearing, pistons, all go in the trash. We'll replace all this. This is a 17mm nut. Break it loose, comes off. You use a traditional flywheel puller. You thread it in there. And normally, with this nice little DeWalt 20 volt, you tighten it and it pops right off. Sometimes you break out the old Thor hammer and you give it a few smacks. PB Blaster. Boy, this stuff works really good. I've been PB Blastering this for 3 days and letting it soak. So what I'll do is I'll remove this. I'll remove the flywheel puller and set this up on in, and I will spray PB Blaster in there in the key, and I will leave it up on end and let it soak. Then I'll hit it with heat, being careful not to get any heat down here because we don't want to screw up the stator. Heat, 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 heat. Flywheel puller. Thor hammer, smack, smack. Undo, tighten, undo, tighten, undo, tighten, smack, smack. More heat, more PB Blaster for 3 days. And I cannot get this off. I run into this once or twice a year, but not on such a beautiful motor. Now this thing hasn't been underwater or anything. There's no rust on it, and that's what usually the rust to that snout. But this guy does not want to come off. So I gotta start chopping a little bit. That's a live split. This was not taken off previously. You can see how I cut the heads of the bolts off, retaining the stator plate. And that allowed me to screw them out and get the top off. Now, I'll work on this bottom one, and we should be able to pull the crank right up. Right now, the bottom bolt is still in the case. Just needed the other ones to be loose. Needed for that one to come out. There we are. The last half moon clip keeps the crank from locking back and forth. That's what all those half moon clips do. They keep everything from walking back and forth. Leaf, a few little debris down there, but other than that, a perfectly good looking OEM motor. Look, the neutral safety switch covers, I think is what they call it, is not even cracked. That is unseen. There'll always be stress cracks here. Not that that hurts it. There's an O-ring that rides in there that keeps it from leaking the transmission fluid out. So if these outside ears are cracked, it doesn't mean that that's going to leak. There's an O-ring in there. And as long as this plastic is seated up against the case, that O-ring's not going to leak. But if you want it to look pretty, they've got billet ones and stuff like that that you can replace these with. The OEM ones they still sell. Although I see OEM stuff starting to disappear. Most everything you can get OEM on this still. I'm going to pull all the wires out of the way so I can cut some ears off this stator plate. I do that so I can get as much area under the flywheel. I'm going to put metal slats all the way around this flywheel. I need as much surface area as I can get so the flywheel is loaded the same all the way around as I try to press this snout out and keep the flywheel stationary so the crank will press out the bottom. So I need to make some room and get rid of a lot of this stator plate. These are very, very careful cuts. Okay, that should do it. I cut all the ears so I have maximum surface to get that thing pressed out. Okay, I'm gonna PB blaster it. What I'm doing now is I'm looking at the surface of this flywheel, because that can be so jammed, rusted, whatever. I don't see any rust, but it is stuck inside this flywheel. And it'll mushroom this flywheel right out. The flywheel will mushroom, turn inside out. The press will squish everything. So I try a little heat, a little PB blaster, nice and easy on the pressure, and tap it around a little bit. Try to break things loose, let it stay there with some pressure, and hopefully work its way out. Okay, I left this sitting here and I heard it pop, so it loosened up, and we got the crank out. We didn't flatten the flywheel. A little pressure, little PB black. Looks like the flywheel is good. No mushrooming. See, it's nice and flat. They will cave in as the snout is being pushed. It sucks this whole surface down, and that looks perfect. It is discolored for me heating it, and no, it doesn't hurt the magnets. Everything is safely out. We saved the important stator and important flywheel. These two things together, I think, are over $1,000 now. So I will double check to make sure everything's good with the multimeter on the stator, and then the flywheel. Nothing you can do. Clean it up, make sure the magnets aren't broke, shake it. Even sometimes you'll hear them shake, rattle, and the flywheel will be good. The only way you can tell this is dead is run the bike, and if the magnets are cracked and not producing the right spark, it'll miss. The bike will miss. But let's get these going. Before I clean the flywheel, I'm going to test this stator out with a good multimeter on resistance, set at 200. There we go. Got about 115, 8, 9, 116. Hard to hold it steady there. 115.8, 115.7. That is very good. Then we'll flip over and do the coil side, which is the red and green wire. Solid. 18.8, 18.9, 18.8. Excellent. That stator is healthy and good, along with the pickup here. That is good news. So we save that. I'm pretty sure this is going to be good, and we will get a crank, either a new crank, or we'll definitely check the old crank out to see if it's bent or anything screwed up. The snout and the inside of this flywheel look perfect. I don't know why that thing was so cinched on there. There's no rust. There's no aftermarket anything in there. No red Loctite. No nothing. It is just pure. You see that? It's amazing. This is the snout. The key's still in it. Everything looks good. I don't know why. There is nothing on that at all. I don't know why it was so stuck on there. But we got it off. We'll get this crank checked out. Okay, this is where we check the crank. We're checking the run out of the snout, which by factory manual says has to be under 3 thousandths. No greater than 3 thousandths. perfect run out would be 0. It looks to be about 1.5. Maybe, yeah, about 1.5. So that's pretty good. I'm going to check the bearings on this crank, and we will probably salvage this one just fine.